So, yeah. So welcome, everyone. Let me just find out what committee members might be present online, because we've got 4 here. Okay, so we have 4 out of 8 CPIC members present. Perhaps others will join us. I know there are 2 folks unable to come, so we have 2 that I hope will be joining us. And are any members of the public other than Jim with us? I don't see any folks signed in. And Margaret, yay. Welcome, Margaret. You're number 5, CPIC. Okay, so let's get started. We always start with a short little agenda review. If anybody, in looking over the agenda, it's been a whole month since we had our last meeting. If there's anything that you see needs to be added to the agenda or moved around, this is the time to say so.
You know what's on here, someone will review the 18th meeting? What is that?
That's the community engagement. We're gonna be doing that right in the center of the meeting. That's the bulk of the meeting.
Yeah, okay, I just
Yeah.
didn't see the 18th meeting.
Yeah. Stakeholder workshop, review and discuss feedback. Yeah, and we'll talk about a follow-up to that. Okay, and the only thing that we'll talk about in terms of that Leslie is not needed for is liaison updates, but we'll see if we have time for that. So let's start with public comment. We always start with that, although folks can participate throughout the meeting. So if you have any, would love to hear any thoughts that you have. I know it's when folks came for the stakeholders workshop, you know, that was a new rollout of the code and the video, and hearing each other with questions might have stimulated some things. So if new ideas have come up, would love to hear your concerns, Jim.
Okay. I'm Jim Howard with Priority Group here in Topsham. And I guess I'm just trying to learn and understand first what it is the committee's trying to accomplish, and what the goals are and how it actually will impact development in town. So I'm kind of curious as I read this through twice. What exactly are you trying to accomplish with it? What is it that we don't like that you're trying to change that we do like?
Right.
That would be my, I have like a long list of questions. So if you have 20 minutes for me, then I'm going to ask all my questions.
What we have really is about 10 minutes right now.
Okay.
And one of the things that happened at the stakeholder workshop is any questions that you have, send them to Julie. They'll get distributed and responses will happen. I think it's very helpful if we don't have have the full discussion now, if you would just let us know what those concerns are. Like that's a big one. That's a really big one. And
So
yeah,
we'd like to know that, and a lot of the folks that I've talked to would like to know that. They say,
Yeah.
well, what are we trying to accomplish here?
yeah,
Why are we changing these rules? And a lot of them are pretty restrictive. They're pretty detailed.
Yeah.
And they're controlling development right down to windows, parking spaces, trash cans inside a building by the exit door. I mean, where's this coming from, and why does that matter? So because I don't understand it, and I do this for a living, and I've built things for 30 years in 17 communities throughout the state, and I don't think I've ever seen anything quite as restrictive as this. And as I try to piece it together, you know, one section to the next and say, okay, they want me to do, you know, X here. But look back at 2.4
Yeah.
to apply it. Well, how do I apply 2.4 to the village area building designs that you have? Where the buildings have to be close together, but yet parking can only be on the side or the back. And when you look at all of those regulations, you go to put them together, when I go to design what it is you're talking about.
Yeah.
I can't design it. So my question always for committees, whether it's the housing committee in Brunswick that we're working with, and for years I've served on committees like this throughout Topsham, is can you take your rules that you're putting in place and then take a piece of property in town and design it? You need to know whether or not this works. To spend all this time and put all this energy into great ideas, but not actually implement it on a piece of paper and say, can we do this? That's pretty important. Because I'm gonna end up before a planning board somewhere in Topsham, and I'm gonna be asking those questions. And, they need to know the answers, you need to know the answers prior to that. One of the other questions that I'd like to have you answer is when you apply those rules to a specific piece of property, have you given any consideration to the cost that you're adding to construction into projects by putting these guidelines in place? Some of the things that you're looking to require are very expensive. And here we are at a time when, whether it's a home or an apartment building or a local business, struggling to meet construction costs. None of the rules or regulations that you're suggesting in here do anything to help that. Another question is, has anybody taken these guidelines and regulations and compared them to the state guidelines and regulations, specifically ADA? When we talk about parking spaces near buildings or parking lots out behind buildings, how do we meet some of the guidelines that the state has in place for building design? And specifically is ADA. Because in many cases, as a developer, we're gonna need to get the fire marshal approval and other approvals. And that also goes back to, the comment I made a minute ago, where you actually are talking about where to put trash receptacles inside the back door of a building, right next to the door, which the fire marshal wouldn't allow us to do probably. So I'm like, well, okay, I can't do that. And how would you ever know if I did it anyways? I'm gonna come walking through the back of the building on an afternoon and check to see whether or not we have trash cans there. So I just don't understand why you're thinking that. Why are you into the back room, the back hallway of my building for trash? It doesn't seem to make sense. Have you discussed this with the planning board? And what are their thoughts on it? Are they actually going to be able to understand this and implement this? Because it's pretty difficult to piece together. So. Those are general.
Yep. Then you have specific.
I have a lot of detail, specifics, because you're specific in here.
Right.
You're having us do specific things.
Yeah.
So 10 minutes is nowhere near enough time for me to be able to have a conversation with you.
Yeah.
Honestly, Susan, writing it all out in an email and sending it to Julie is probably not gonna work for me. It's not my thing. I need to talk to you.
Yeah.
So we need to find some time that I can come in.
Sure.
And that I can sit down and I can go over all of these comments with you, just to make sure you understand the challenges that we're gonna face as a developer, just like all the open space that you're asking for, and the easements that you're asking for the public.
Now, are you talking about, you're staying within the boundaries of Topsham Center Recode? When
Correct.
you're talking about
Right here, Topsham Center
open
zone,
space? Okay,
your guidelines here.
Yep.
You talk about, if there's not enough 12 feet with on the street, that we're gonna give an easement.
yep, gotcha.
An easement to who? The town? Who gets the easement? Who's responsible for the easement? Who maintains the easement? Who's liable if somebody falls in the easement? We have a lot of green space you want to see. We want buildings built all around green space. A lot of issues for, well, how are we gonna get parking to be close enough to the building that you now want me to have 12 feet from the street? And be able to, and cluster buildings together with a park in the middle, that you want two entrances to get into, for who? Are you telling me as a private citizen that I need to have all that green space open to the public? that the public gets to use it other than my customers that rent from me? And if that's the case, who's responsible for that? Who's responsible to shovel those sidewalks, mow that lawn, and if somebody falls and gets hurt? Because you're telling me that I need to let the public in there. Well, I don't know that I want that liability. So I read it all through and all of that comes up, because now in my mind, I'm standing before the planning board and I'm trying to implement this.
Yeah.
I need to go to my bank. I need to borrow money and I'm giving out easements and they're gonna wanna know who's liable.
Yeah.
They're gonna wanna see insurance policies, because they won't give me a loan if I don't. So there's a lot here that I can see the good that you're trying to do with the design with it. But I'm not sure you understand the ramifications of all of it.
I mean, the ramifications are always gonna be a little bit of a surprise in some ways, but let me just say, Jim, I think, first of all, I am so delighted that you have gotten into the weeds, deep in the weeds. That's where we want the folks who use this code to be, so that we can hear that. It sounds to me, given your preferences, that a follow-up workshop is needed, where, you know, we have the 1.5 to 2 hours to go through with, you know, a fine-tooth comb, some of the specifics. And probably, I'm thinking we will need Leslie with us for this.
Yeah.
So, you know, I can answer some of these in terms of what did we want to accomplish, but,
But you know, and at the end of the day, and I appreciate that, and I'd like to
Yeah.
do that, and I had talked with other developers and folks to get their comments before I came here tonight. To make sure that I understood it, that my thoughts were not just mine,
yeah,
but you know, were they in on it? But you know, one of the important things is when I or they ask the committee questions, you know, we really actually expect you to know the answer. So, and it's good that the consultants are here and that they can help. But when we're before a planning board, it's too late to have the consultant sitting in the room to try to determine what we meant and what we didn't mean. So you guys really need to know what this means, and you need to be able to explain it to me. You, so that we understand. Because if we don't, this is gonna get lost. This is just gonna become chaos later when we hit the planning board and we try to implement.
I hear you, and I appreciate that you have brought forth some specifics with more to come. So we'll schedule some time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a workshop session.
Yes, I think it needs to be a workshop session, because it sounds to me, Jim, like these are your concerns, but you're also reflecting some concerns of others. This is not just your standalone.
just me.
Right, right,
Right
right.
amount of time in this
Right.
since the last meeting I attended here in the room.
Yep.
And I'm happy to invite those folks when we have that workshop.
Yeah.
For you.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to do that.
Right.
Can I try a quick
Sure,
answer?
absolutely.
First, this is hugely helpful, because there's no point in our trying to get something endorsed by the town, passed by the town, the citizens of the town, that doesn't work. I understand.
I appreciate that. It's gonna be a better town meeting
Yes.
if we are all on the same page,
Happy.
or pretty much on the same page when we go in.
Exactly.
Right? So let's discuss
Yeah.
these battles before we ever get that stage.
Absolutely.
So it's a good meeting and things can get approved.
Absolutely.
Your opening question was, what are we trying to accomplish? And this is not something that comes from the committee. It's just my off the cuff response to that question. And what I would say is that it's an outgrowth of the citizen engagement process that the update committee did. And there were, I don't know if you were able to attend many of those meetings, but it was, I think, put in its simplest form, Jim, for me, it's we want Topsham to look more like, let's say, downtown Bath or downtown Brunswick than we do the mall. And I say we, because that was what came through loud and clear with the visual presentations that the public was asked to respond to and note. So, yeah, from a 30,000 foot level, I'd say that's what we're trying to accomplish. Really appreciate the depth to which you've gone into this and the details. I'm an architect and our firm worked with a lot of developers and I worked with the state fire marshal's office in the I can't even remember what it's called anymore, but the state office that implemented ADA, and I can fully appreciate that what's in a document that you have to adhere to has to make sense. So I think it's great. That's the best I can do to answer the global question.
Susan, I have a question.
Yeah, and I just want to say one thing, because it's okay for us to disagree. I would just, I think what folks in Topsham, what came through in the comprehensive plan to me is people want some walkable areas in town where they can go and do their shopping, where there might be residential and shops run into each other. They'd like some, unscheduled social moments. I think we know that we're not Bath and we're not Brunswick, that we're not likely to ever really look like that. We've developed differently. We are a different town. However, to be able to incorporate as we grow and develop more walkability, more areas where people can both walk and cycle and do multiple things, where it's not so car driven. I think that's what people are wanting, and that's what and I think that came through in the project direction memo in the fall of 2021. And now all the details are coming out, and this is exactly the time to as you're doing, bring it to us, and we'll grapple with it. I honestly don't expect that all of us on the comprehensive plan implementation committee will ever be the experts to explain it all to you. So, we have professional planners for that, and we've needed the consultants all the way along. So, the planning board will be having a workshop. The select board is having a workshop on exactly this coming up in a few weeks.
Okay,
So-
and I can relate to what you're saying. I mean, we built gas stations backwards as we did Topsham and Rusty's, right? And the
Yeah.
whole industry said that'll never work, right? But it looks nice and we have a streetscape and
And it's working great.
canopies behind it, and it's incredibly successful.
Yeah.
And now we build that throughout the state, right? So to accomplish those goals, right? You have got to be able to, you've got to put regulations and guidelines in place that allow people like me to actually do it. Or we don't get any walkable space, we don't get any new trails, we don't get any more open space.
Yeah.
Because we're unable to develop a property,
Right.
because it's too cost effective, it's not cost effective to do it.
Yeah. I hear you.
Right, so that's what I hope that I can bring to the committee is, now I gotta go see Julie and tell her that I wanna get this done, and she's gonna be reading all the regulations off to me for all my guidelines, and we gotta make sure that they all fit together, so we can actually implement.
And all I
We
will
get
say,
notified.
this is a draft, right? And this is exactly what we need in terms of hearing the effect that you see and what needs to be modified.
Thank you.
Thanks. Andy?
And I don't expect an answer, but my thought is, what flexibility do we have from the 2019 comprehensive plan? Because that was created in 2016, 17, and 18 and adopted in 19.
Yeah.
We've been through a pandemic since then.
Yeah.
Is 2023, are we locked into that 2019, or is there some flexibility on interpretation? And I'll give an example, would be drive-throughs, I guess.
Yeah.
If drive-throughs can be created like they work, so they aren't so ugly, they don't queue up into the streets, is there more flexibility because of the demand drive-throughs since the pandemic?
Yeah,
And I don't expect the answer, I'm just saying, I wonder those things, do we have that?
I think that very statement of, the pandemic happened, it's shifted some things. I think you can have a really interesting conversation. How much has it really shifted things? I don't know. Like you said, this is not the time to answer all of that. But I'd love to hear from the consultants in terms of the communities that they've been working with, you know, my understanding is we got this comp plan until we have the next one. And we know that the drive-through issue is something, but does it change? How much does it change things? I don't know. It hasn't changed a thing in my life. I've still got masks for when I need them, got my vaccines. You know, I'm careful where I go and where I hang out. I don't use drive-throughs any more than I used to. Kurt, we're extending the period a little bit, so.
I'll try to be brief.
Yeah.
So I'm Kurt Neufeld. No secret, I work for Jim and I'm on CDI with Andy. But interestingly, I've done my review completely independently of his. Just happened to be over the weekend, and I'm looking at it from the eyes of an engineer, not an owner and a developer. So I did have some questions, and I guess I would like to hear how to get more of them in front of you, what the appropriate form is and when to come back. But
So can I just
Yeah.
ask you, you know, you and Jim might have very different styles in terms of how you'd like to present this to us. One of the things that came up in the workshop, the stakeholder workshop, is people have questions and comments way beyond the public time at this moment.
yes,
If you'd be willing to put some of those in writing to Julie, she'll share them. And one of the things we want to do is sort of create a log of the questions and the categories they fall in. What's the issue, you know, whether it's materials or drive-through or parking and what our responses are. So if you'd be willing to put those in writing, that would be one way to do it.
I will do what I can in that regard.
Okay,
It may take a few different email links. Not to say there's just that much material, but
well, there's
how much
a lot.
time do?
Yeah,
to
no, I hear you.
dedicate it?
I'll invite you to the workshop.
So the, for example, in the master plan development section, which I think, could be very applicable in newly opened areas. One of the things that's talked about is the block size. And a block must be no more than 600 feet with a maximum perimeter of 1,800 feet. If I took 600 and the 1,800, I got 3 feet left. So I'm not sure if I'm reading this wrong or what, but it says the block length, no more than 600 feet. I have a 600-foot long block and the perimeter is only 1,800 feet. Then I got 3 feet. So maybe there's some zeros are missing in there, but even once that math is corrected, a 600-foot long block, looking at some of the usefulness in there, I would assume at the end of that, you're gonna have a street on each side. So you have 600 feet of block, of which not all of that is available for the building. And then given the complete street approach in here with the on-street parking and everything else, now you have 120 feet on either side of a 600-foot long block. And it seems like the impervious is going way up compared to where it might be.
I have a feeling that there's a misconnection there, because there are. A master plan development depends on how many acres you're talking about. It's a minimum of 4, right? And there can be streets created through it. We might want to just have a workshop that focuses on master plan developments.
Yeah, I think the implementation of that seems problematic to me, reading through and how I would
Yeah,
go through that.
so thanks for drawing our attention to that.
And it says, even if you go up to 800 feet, well, now you've got to bisect that with some sidewalk walkways. And again, if it's a Bath scale, I would think if I would go to Bath or Brunswick, the length of the facade of those nice old buildings is going to be somewhat greater than 800 feet, even with the cut throughs. So I guess to use a term, has this been play tested? Has it been applied to anything.
So you're saying exactly what Jim did, which I think is a very valid point. Has it been play tested? Of course not. And do we need to, take some next steps there? I hear you.
So as another example, when some of the buildings, styles, they'll talk about, I'm gonna pick on the row housing here. The row housing says your maximum building width would be 80 feet. And then up to 4 units. So in 80 feet, you've got 4 units, so each one's only 20 feet wide. If they're in New York, apartments bigger than that. So how does that break down? When it's prescriptive, and it says the building width maximum 80 feet. And that's for 2 to 4 units. Again,
But you're talking vertically,
well, no, it's the building width.
right? You're talking building width, but the units are not necessarily,
So you might have overrunners. Okay, but so. Again, this is something to, you know, be mindful of your meeting time here. I'm not sure that it gets worked out. Or and maybe I'm interpreting it wrong. Some of them said that you, particularly like in the workshop warehouse regulations, you're not supposed to have more than 15 feet without a window. Well, a lot of people in those sorts of businesses need shelving on the inside and they don't want windows on the other side of their shelving. So I still kind of have to scratch my head about this, and I will do my best to write up these examples. But I'm saying that as I'm reading what's here, it would be difficult to implement. And I think a lot of the folks that I have worked for as an engineer wouldn't go through it.
I hear you. You are drawing our attention to a level of detail that we need to live at, and thank you. We'll have future additional workshops and we'll get into these weeds together.
Wouldn't be surprised if Leslie's just freaking out over this, and I've got all the answers. Because I know that Leslie often talks about the flexibility.
So let's let her
the-
come in,
Yeah.
shall we?
She gives us a thumb up there.
Yeah. So, I'm going to, move our administrative items to the end of the meeting. We'll end this portion of the meeting at 10 to 6. So we'll carve out that last 10 minutes of the meeting for administrative items. Item Roman numeral 3, but we'll jump right now to Roman numeral 5, which is the community engagement communication and the Topsham Center RECO stakeholder workshop, review and discuss feedback, which is ongoing. So Leslie, come to us.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna turn my camera on for now and hopefully it's good. We're like testing a new internet connection and it doesn't seem to be so good.
Okay.
So what would you like for me to respond?
I think it's not possible for you to respond in huge detail to questions that are coming up right now today. But I think we need to schedule another workshop, have the questions come up one by one and have those discussions. In the meantime, those of us on the committee need to jump into the weeds, having heard some of the concerns. And then, you know, we'll all do this together. If there's anything you heard, Leslie, that's sort of gives some quick answers, I think that's fine. If you want to take a couple of minutes, but I don't think we should put you on the spot having just heard things right now.
I think I would really like to allay some of the fears that these numbers are not thought through and that they have not been tested. These are absolutely numbers that we've used over and over again. Am I coming through okay?
Perfect.
Okay, good. Like for example, a row house often is 20 feet. That is a very normal width for a row house. So an 80-foot wide building of just 4 units is, you know, not, it's it's a normal size, 20 feet. In fact, many row houses or townhouses are only 18 feet. That's how the developers get them to fit in onto sites. And I've measured many townhouses and row houses so that I'm very confident with that number. And it doesn't say that, somebody can't do something. It's going to be a lot deeper. This is just on the front street face as well. And that also applies to many of the other regulations. For example, the 15-foot maximum without windows on a workshop is just along that front facade. So as part of that kind of walkability, what we're trying to do is manage just those street facades as much as possible to make them as permeable and as interesting for people to walk along as possible, but allowing, lots of flexibility in the back. So those don't apply to, the rear or the interior facades or anything like that. We're just talking about the street facades. And in many cases, I need to look, but it's just that primary front street facade, not even side streets. Just real quick, in terms of the block size, we talked about this block size, 600 by 600 by 300 by 300 as a sort of rectilinear block is 1,800 perimeter feet. And so in terms of that number, we're just aiming to get as walkable and as many kind of accessible sort of decision points on the block as possible. That block size, that perimeter block size, doesn't include the streets. So that's the property line block, not including the rights of ways that surround that block. But most importantly for Topsham, if you read the next few paragraphs, you'll notice that there's lots of flexibility based on natural, like topography, waterways, man-made highways, and other streets that give you flexibility for those perimeter numbers and those block size numbers. So those are, again, very standard walkable block lengths and sizes, but there are outs in that MPD, and there's also exceptions allowed for that when you're getting it approved for flexibility in those sizes. So those are just a couple. The trash thing that's a may. If you use the interior trash, it's an option. And all that we're trying to do is say, hey, don't put it like in the middle of the building, so it's got to be pulled all the way out. It's a set of standards that we've used over and over again for many communities. So none of this is, brand new stuff that isn't used in other locations. Therefore, it has been tested in other locations. So I just want to I think it's really important that we not just let these kind of ideas continue out there, in discussion, that we haven't considered all those numbers and that they aren't realistic.
Right, and I didn't mean to imply that the numbers haven't been tested. It's just that we as a committee haven't gone through all of that, experience. And it's very good to get into the level of detail that we are at this point. Shall we go back to some of the questions that came up in comments in the workshop on the 18th? A few of these, I think, are clearly for the committee to respond to. And in fact, the very first one that came on that day had to do with why are we not including the land west of 295? And this was a decision that the committee made. And we looked at, we really looked at the plan several times in terms of what is the guidance coming through. And we realized that sticking to areas where there's already infrastructure in place, where there's water and sewer, and allowing the development to occur there and encouraging the density to develop there, that was what we felt is the most sensible thing at this stage. So that was a committee decision that was made a while ago. And I think there was, there was some discussion about it. We know that there's interest in that area, but there are also, significant challenges and pluses and minuses there. So I think we stuck with the decision based on that rationale. The other, we're talking there, I'm looking for questions that were quite specific. One had to do with the fragmentation in the Topsham Fair Mall, I think, and also in the potential new area, having to do with the power line. Not a lot we can do about that. But I understand the challenge of it in terms of, but I don't think what I'm looking for is stuff that Leslie can sort of weigh in on.
The power line issue is one that around the world, they're finding solutions of things they can do. I mean,
Yeah.
we can't yet get rid of the power lines. So they're gonna be there. We just need to make use of them and make them look a little more attractive, like I think I was telling Jim about a place in Porter near our house down there where they use that area and they keep it landscaped and it's for the children to play next to the building. That's the.
In a farmer's market or.
Farmer's market and things like that.
Yeah.
So there's ways to deal with that.
Right, but I don't believe there's anything in the code that keeps us from doing that. And there was a traffic plan. I'm looking, so there were some comments and questions about signage. And I'm not sure if that's something where you can weigh in now, Leslie. And then we're talking about parking. And there were some comments about, wanting double drive-throughs, outdoor seating and double drive-throughs. So those are a couple of specific things that came up. Did we say anything at this point about signage? There were a couple of different people who had comments about that.
I'm gonna let Kirk respond to that because that's actually not something, we didn't create separate signs in I didn't for Topsham Center, but Kirk worked on the signs.
Yeah.
Kirk, you're not coming through very clearly. Let's see if.
It's kind of muffled.
Yeah. Is there something over your speaker?
No.
Okay. Better, that's better.
Is it better?
That's
Okay.
better. Yeah.
The sign regulations, as part of the overall zoning code update have not been substantively revised. The planning board was felt fairly strongly that some effort had gone into I'll say fairly recent update of the town's sign code, and they really weren't looking forward to revisiting that exercise as part of this update. And for those, and frankly, our review of the existing regulations suggested it was a fairly sound, legally defensible framework, and that in and of ourselves, we didn't see any reason for substantive modification. So if there are perceived defects in the sign regulations, I wouldn't want to pin that on the Topsham Center effort. And it's certainly something that could easily be addressed as part of the remaining chapters of the code update.
Thanks, Kirk. Okay, I think there were some concerns about parking and where parking is, and if there's enough space for parking. I know that there's sort of that, perennial, not enough, too much kind of thing that maybe we'll always live with. But Leslie clarified some things for those of us on the committee and staff. Are there some things that you can sort of share here, Leslie, in terms of how people might view the parking situation?
Sure. So parking, there's a general section in the upfront that's 2.40.5.
Yeah.
And it's called parking location on the lot. And it sort of outlines where parking can occur on all of the lots in the Topsham Center. And the idea is that we're trying to the sort of first priority is on the back. And again, this is assuming that in many instances, not a part of what the private developer is doing, but that on-street parking might be available where possible in as many locations as possible. And I think that's very consistent with the comprehensive plan, and it's very consistent with that kind of walkability and teaser parking and such. And so, for example, on the Crooker site, we hope that any new streets would have on-street parking so that there would be accessible, really accessible parking there. But in general, on the private lot, parking is sort of allowed without any regulation, essentially. I mean, design regulations in the parking section, but in the rear yard, that there are limited side yard parking to the side of any building. Almost all of the building types have that limited side yard parking, and that means limited side yard means one bay of parking, so an aisle with parking on either side located perpendicular to the street where it's accessed off. So that'd be about a 65-foot width, which, if things filled in later, would be a nice building infill later, but would provide for that's really easily accessible parking off the street. And then in the suburban storefront, parking is allowed in any side yard and in any rear yard, not in the front yard, but in any side yard. So that side yard parking isn't limited in width. It can be as wide as needed. It can be on both sides. We're just asking for the building to be built up to the sidewalk or, within the build to zone of the sidewalk so that there is both accessibility from a pedestrian's perspective and a vehicular perspective. So the suburban storefront is unique in that it sort of has that more auto-oriented focus. So that's pretty much parking. It has its own setbacks and such, but the idea is to not do it in the front between the building, to do it as much to the side as possible, so that when you're driving down the street, you're not driving down along, lots of parking, you're driving down building facades with parking kind of in between.
Right. And just to point out to folks who have lived here for a while and developed here, know this, that back when was it 2005, the Main Street plan was done, there was a move toward that, I think.
I was on the
right.
committee and vice chair of that committee.
Right.
Main Street Vision Plan.
And so what I saw out of that committee was that there were some buildings developed at that time where, they weren't maybe built right up to the street, but parking was in the rear. And the front facade, whether it was used as an entryway, was built in order to sort of present front, and
Down East Credit Union.
exactly, yeah. So we were moving that way in that direction quite a while ago. Did my math, 18 years. So, yeah. And so now we've actually come decisively to do more of that. Okay, so the next
Drive-throughs?
drive-throughs, yes.
Okay, so drive-throughs are located at the end of the principal uses article. And they are written specifically for Topsham Fair Mall 1 zone and the Crooker District zone. And that was a decision made by the committee to allow those in those locations. We have not, so in general, they're allowed on the rear or the side, just like the parking. avoiding that street facade, any street facade, so that they would not be, you know, super visible. And again, so that if you're walking along the street, you are accessing the building more easily. There isn't any limitation written in there on how many drive-throughs you can have necessarily, right, Kirk? You could have a double drive-through as long as it's in the rear, or the side yard. And again, side yard meaning not a street side yard, but an interior side yard. So we did limit them on the Crooker site to specific uses, so financial institutions and pharmacies, as opposed to fast food. But in the Topsham Fair Mall 1 zone, they must be on a suburban storefront building, which I'm not sure that that's absolutely necessary, but that's how we've kind of managed it. And we're assuming that most of them would occur that way as well, and not on a 2-story storefront building. But we didn't limit the number of them. So we're just sort of locating them on the site to where they will have less impact on pedestrian traffic.
Yeah, question, Andy.
I can't remember personally whether it was done before I was on the committee or not, but I can't remember limiting to just pharmacies and banks. Is that's something that the committee voted on? Is that?
That
can't
was
remember.
just for the Crooker district.
Yeah, I know, but I
Okay.
still can't remember that.
Oh gosh, I remember you being there, but maybe there was so much discussion that
Well,
it got lost.
talking about 20% or something like that once, and then we decided they would be allowed in the Crooked, but I can't remember just a very limited use. And I guess what's the foundation for that? Just asking the question. And I don't think it was something Leslie pushed. I think it's something that.
I think it's, you know, in keeping with that sort of desire for, shifting the emphasis slightly, perhaps, away from vehicular traffic. And that has been the emphasis in Topsham for many years, toward pedestrians and cyclists, so that, you know, in order to create a more walkable, a safe, walkable and cyclable area, limiting drive-throughs seems to increase safety. That was what it was apparent, I think, to those of us on the committee. I don't think we had a long and detailed discussion on it, but that it became apparent. I think it was apparent to all of us that safety, you know, would be increased if we limit drive-throughs. And where are those most needed? Pharmacies and banks. So other food places, whether it's fast foods or restaurants or whatever, are those absolutely necessary to have? Jim, go for it.
I did bring an article, I'm gonna leave. Fast food diners take their meals to go. Gives a lot of information about the statistics lately.
Yeah.
That's the pandemic.
Sure,
Pandemic has changed people's habits
Yeah.
permanently.
okay,
Restaurants from a McDonald's to an Applebee's, 10% of their business is done inside the restaurant now. Most of the business, people don't want to go and sit in the restaurants, they want to go through a pickup window. We're now designing convenience stores with pickup windows. So you can pull in, you can pick up, and you can go. And it's kind of ironic, we want to have less parking. Well, a drive up actually allows you to have less parking, less pavement. So, you know, if we're gonna make everybody sit, it's gonna go, or go into McDonald's or go into Applebee's, well, then we're gonna have more parking spaces so they can all go inside. But yet we don't want drive-throughs. And if it's just for safety, there are certainly all kinds of ways to mitigate pedestrian and bicycle access across the drive lanes for drive-throughs. And we're doing that with our convenience stores. Customers want to come in, they want to grab their food, they want to eat it in the car. They wanna take it home to eat it.
But it's to go.
They want it to go.
Yeah.
Right, so if we don't give them a pickup window, like Sam's in Topsham here.
Yeah.
It was the old Tim Hortons building during the pandemic. When everything was closed and you couldn't get in and out, that restaurant survived because it had a pickup window. You couldn't order there. You called into the restaurant, you placed your order, and you just pulled up to the window and you picked it up and you left. And that saved that restaurant during the pandemic. So it has got to be a way for us to allow the design that's safe for pedestrians and bicyclists. And, you know, you may want to limit that, but, you know, you're not gonna ride your bike to McDonald's to pick
Nope,
up
you're
food for your
not.
whole family. You're not gonna go to Applebee's to the pickup on your bicycle, or on a rainy day or a cold day in Maine. It just, that doesn't work. So I'm concerned as one of the people who may wanna work to redevelop the current site.
Yeah.
That we're gonna limit a lot of opportunities that people in the community want. They want the ability to be able to do that. They don't want them driving into Brunswick, and they don't want to drive into Brunswick to do it. They want to come to Topsail. There's got to be a way to bridge that gap, Susan, that can be safe, visually appealing to it, and work.
So I'm glad you cut that article out. We'd love to see that research.
Pass that right up here,
Yeah,
and
thank
you guys can make copies of it.
Because the thing,
Nope.
I know that the ways in which restaurants like that, the great example, survived during the pandemic, has that changed behavior continued after? And what you're saying is it has.
Well,
Yeah,
there's some evidence there that it has. Our customers in our properties
yeah,
say it has, which is why we're now designing convenience stores. Convenience store of all things with a pickup.
okay. Okay, we hear you. We'll take that into consideration. And have that discussion with Leslie in terms of what, you know, what's the best way? Should we loosen that up, and what's the best way to do that? So, and not to be decided here. Okay, let's see if there are other questions that came up on the 18th. Do you have any in your notes? I know there were some things about material.
Yep, I was gonna say, there was a comment that their glass ratios were too onerous in, I'm guessing it was suburban storefront buildings.
And can you hear that, okay, Leslie? The
No, I
glass-
couldn't hear what you said.
Yeah,
The minimum transparency requirements, or I thought that there was a comment about the percentages of the materials, not including the glass, but I could be wrong because that's a common question that I get.
yeah, Chris was asking, it was in sort of 8.1 and 8.2, there was where the materials are listed. He said it was a complex review framework. Can it be simplified? So that it's not quite so prescriptive. And I remember Joe asking, you know, can you foresee a way to simplify it? You know, sort of putting it back to the person asking the question, because you know, the materials, I know this is something that you know, you've done before, Leslie. You know what these materials are, and by suggesting them as what's usable. I mean, this is you know, we're working to create a sense of place in Topsham where, you know, we say walkable town center, but what, you know, when we have discussions with people, very often people will say, well, there isn't one. Right, right. And over time, can we, through this code, create an attractive, welcoming sense of place where people entering town from any one of the directions will have a sense of what Topsham is, you know, in an attractive, welcoming, even I remember from Bill Maine, inspiring that the built environment can actually inspire a sense of community. So, I think what I'm hearing is that there are a lot of perspectives to be considered. And some of them, we're hearing the perspectives and the questions of practitioners who are going to be using the code, and that's exactly who we wanted to hear this from. So let's see. Before we move on, Leslie, do you want to say anything about the materials question?
Sure. I mean, I think it's a pretty straightforward, and it maybe could be presented in a little bit more simplified manner, but the idea is that the facades of the buildings need to be primarily of the list of major materials. And then there's a list of minor materials that can be used. And again, this is just facade materials. The second list does give it could just be a 1/3, 2/3, which is essentially 65%, 35%, or vice versa, 35% minor materials and 65% major materials. And we could break the list, make the list just that. But we have built in a little bit more flexibility for certain building types to have materials that we might not want on other building types. So for example, that the workshop building might allow for some more industrial type materials like metal and concrete, and that some of the housing might allow for, am I coming through okay? I feel like I'm really laggy. Okay. And that some of the more residential buildings might use other materials such as, hardy shingles or panels for the surfaces of those buildings. So, it is meant to address the different sort of subzones within Topsham Center, or the different zones within Topsham Center, but we could make it a little bit more simple. I think that when it comes down to actually reviewing a building design, if they follow the code, it'll be a lot easier and make a lot more sense, and you won't end up with materials in places that you wish that they weren't. And you won't end up with materials that you would like to use on something like a workshop building that we haven't allowed because we didn't want it anywhere else.
Any comments from the committee on that? Okay, thank you. I have a feeling that some of the questions and comments that came up at the stakeholder workshop on the 18th, that we will go through another more in-depth iteration of those after people have had the chance to really look much more closely. I think some of those questions came after a quick look at the code, and sometimes you need to look at the detail a little bit more in terms of seeing where the exceptions are and where the flexibility comes, and where the different building types call for different things. So I'm hoping that as we move towards scheduling a follow-up workshop, some of that can be addressed in a substantive way. So let's see what we can. So were there any things, I'll just ask Leslie, were there any things that came up at that workshop that you feel should be addressed now? We've talked about drive-throughs and parking and materials and
Glass, transparency.
yeah. Go ahead, Andy.
There were several questions that didn't pertain to what we were prepared to discuss. So I think we need to make sure that that's clear in the next workshop, what we're gonna talk about, because and as important as ever, how do they get the answers that they have now? do we just say the recode, or do we try to direct them somewhere? I think we need to make a list of some of these questions that are
Are
coming.
you talking about questions that had to do with areas outside of
Yes.
Topsham Center
Not
Recode?
just the areas topic too, that were kind of out of the. You know, I can't remember what it was something to do with sewer or water or something like that. You know, even though it wasn't, could be our area or could not be our area, it wasn't applicable to what we had set the workshop up for.
Does
I'm
that
just
ring a
saying.
bell for you? Yeah.
I feel like you directed those questions to me. The
Yeah.
folks could.
Maybe you
email me
answered,
if they had
maybe
questions.
you answered them, but I think I heard some rumblings from people there that, how come I couldn't get my answer? I guess I was surprised that I couldn't get an answer to my question there. I thought I could, that type of comment.
I think one of the things that we've tried to make clear to people, and I don't know if it's come across as well as I'd hoped, is CPIC is actually focused with working closely with Leslie on the Topsham Center Recode, where form-based code is being used. The map is on the town website. It went out in the crier. Areas outside of that, the code is going through an update, a cleanup, minor revisions in terms of actual substantive revisions at this point. And I don't know if there are any exceptions to that, but because the planning board is familiar with the current code, the planning board has been willing to take that on and workshop it. And so you have been working closely, Julie, with the planning board around, and Kirk, moving that through the process of workshops.
So when someone asks a question of me outside of here, I should direct them to you, Julie.
And those, you know, the planning board workshops are posted, they're public, right? So if people have questions about those areas, come to those planning board meetings and workshops. Because that's where feedback will be helpful, you know, as we move through the process. Okay. Anything further, Leslie?
No, I mean, I have some very specific questions in my notes about things like the pylon sign for development, and I don't know that those are, I don't know that it would be helpful for the code discussion I mean, I don't even know the answer to that actually, so.
I think the code enforcement officer has addressed that particular question.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Okay, so I know there were some questions about the various other zones, but I think that's would have helped here to clarify where folks can go to get those questions asked and answered. Okay, I think I'm happy to have Leslie and Kirk stay with us. What we're doing now is just shifting to looking at next steps in a public process. I know I've had a conversation with Leslie around, you know, sort of what dates are open. The one date that I want to make sure is on people's calendar is tomorrow we have a workshop session, and we'll talk more informally at that point. But the select board workshop on Topsham Center Recode is the Wednesday, September 6th. It will be right here in the Don Russell meeting room. Leslie and Kirk will be with us virtually. I know that there are some questions and concerns that we've heard there, but we have not heard any specifics. So we're looking forward, you know, to hearing some of those. I think one of the questions that would be great to at least explore a little bit right now is what makes sense to have a follow-up workshop? Because and this would be virtual. What I wonder is, would it be possible I selfishly want to be around and I'm away for a chunk of September. I'm wondering if people would be available for like the 31st of August. We have a rare and wonderful 5th Thursday in August. And if the 31st is something that Leslie has available, that would allow us to have. Are you available? Yes, that's right. I thought you were, right. We could have a follow-up workshop.
Is this a workshop we're talking about?
Yep.
Meeting you
Yep.
can come to on
Yep.
the 31st,
Yep.
okay? I will say yes and confirm that tomorrow when I get
Okay.
back.
Great.
I'll let you.
Yeah, thank you. And when we had the other one, it was 10:30 to noon. And it felt like we ran out of time. So I wonder if we want to just give ourselves a full 2 hours and do that. And depending on how many people RSVP, we can do it either this way or we can do it more informally around some tables. It will have to be recorded. It's a public meeting. But what do you think, Leslie? Do you have your calendar with you to say yes? Like a 10 to noon works?
I thought the workshops did not have to be recorded. I thought I was told that.
And if they don't need to be recorded?
I
they
think
won't be
advance
recorded?
info.
They're not required to be.
So public meetings like this are required to be recorded.
So is this gonna be a workshop like the meeting that we just attended where the room's just full of everybody?
Yep,
Alright, so it's gonna be hard to, so how am I gonna get 20, 30 minutes of your time
well,
when that's? I'll come to that one, but I'm gonna ask you for another one. Where I can actually sit down and have conversations with you about this and understand it. I would appreciate if we could do that, it's up to
Yeah.
the committee.
yeah,
But if there's just a room full of people and everybody's asking random questions, how are we ever gonna get into the details and the substance?
my assumption, and is as a little bit of authority as chair of the committee. I trust that you have heard the concerns of others. And that your reading of the code and the questions and concerns that you bring forward because of your experience in town will be valuable to a broader audience. So I'm not saying no one else will get a chance to say anything, but I think it's fair to say that we want to hear from you in some detail. And if something else is needed, we'll schedule it. But I think having that kind of session where we actually can sort of sit down and, I think it's one of those things where I don't think it's fair to put a consultant on the spot and have an answer ready for you with every case, but many of them I think will, I think to have that level of discussion, I think that's probably something that we will want to have some discussion on. Leslie, weigh in if you would like, because I'm thinking that, having a listening session is very important, but then having a session where people can sort of hear, just as you have today, that, the dimensions that are reflected in the code are well tested. And they don't apply to every building type, but they are, to sort of point out some things that are actually available and visible in the code, but that people reading it may miss because of, this is new material. So having that reassurance right there and then may be something that we'll delve into with your okay.
Susan, what do you think about instead of doing just a big 2-hour open to everybody session, and just mute me or something if you don't want me to go further?
Oh, please go ahead.
What about doing it kind of like as office hours, where we have, say, would that be 6 20-minute slots? And people can come to those 20-minute slots and ask questions specific, because I do feel like there's a little bit of I think people feel like they have to stand up at the podium and ask a bunch of questions, whereas it would be much more helpful to kind of dive, put the code up on the screen and talk about the specific sections that people are referring to. And I'm not saying that it has to just be one person per 20 minutes. It could be, 3 people per 20 minutes or something like that. But it would just make it a little bit more informal, and you could sort of do more question and answer. And, maybe we could even record those so that they could be available for people to view if they wanted, to hear, what the questions were and what the responses were. Because I'm a little bit concerned about some of the I have 5 pages of notes that I took from that workshop that day, and very few of them were specific enough for me to respond back to you with with a response. And so it would be great if we could just get down, into the weeds and have those responses so that we can modify the code and make sure that we can move forward, as opposed to just continually having these sessions where people are just, concerned.
And it sounds like you have done this before with good result. Yes, thank you. Okay. How does that sound to you, Jim?
Fine, I'll do my best to limit it to the 20 minutes Leslie would like to have me limit it to.
You can just sign up for 2.
I'm doing 3 different names. My twin brother's coming.
All right.
But that would work for me. Probably better, actually. I
Okay,
like that suggestion.
that's great. Okay. So how do we go about scheduling that? Do we do it just like we're doing now? We're looking at August 31st and seeing what kind of block of time. Yeah. So what kind of, tell me, we did it 10 to 12. Jim is going to let us know tomorrow. That time block works for you right now, Listen, right? And
Sure.
Great. Okay, we're on. 8:31.
It does make it so staff has to people have to sort of sign up for a slot.
Yes, and it doesn't have to be one person, but it could be a couple of people doing together in a back-to-back session. Yes.
And I'm thinking this is still like a public meeting, though. Anyone could come in and witness this going on.
I think it's probably not. No, I think this is come for your time period and then
Okay.
see you later.
Yeah.
I think that's what, we want to do this in a way that's going to work. And, and that's, I'm getting that feeling that this is what's going to work. Thank you. Okay, so we'll see how many emails you get. Okay, so, one of the things that, so we've got the select board workshop. We talked about that on
What
the,
time was that? Select board workshop?
I don't know. I think the select board workshops are in the late afternoon, evening, but I didn't get confirmed on that. I wrote to Derek and I did not get confirmation on that.
To make sure I'm clear, this is a workshop about the recode or about the form base?
It's about the Topsham Center recode. And it's something that, the planning board is gonna do as well, but the sequence in which we do it is we update.
Is that with this committee or are you updating?
I think as many of the committee as can come is good. I'll be there and I hope Rick will be there. I think it's clear to me from comments when I gave the update to the select board that there are, even though the attendance that night, there were only 3 out of 5 select board members present, there were some statements about some things that they that were seen as troubling without any detail, and we're looking forward to hearing very specifically what some of those things are. So that will be, that'll be a public session on the, and can you help Julie find out when that time is? Because I think people want to put it.
Mid-Coast Hospital's big fundraiser day that I think goes from 8 till 4.
Okay, and the last time the select board had a workshop that I was involved with, I think it was at 5 p.m. the bicycle pedestrian committee workshop.
This is, for whatever reason, I have this on the seventh, it's the sixth.
It's the sixth,
Okay.
it was suggested, and that it be on the seventh, because that's when the select board meets, but they would rather devote a separate time to
Okay.
this, yeah. Okay, so the next little piece here is the planning board workshop on Topsham Center Recode. Julie is gonna work on securing dates with the planning board and work directly with Leslie. We've looked at a couple of dates that I know that Leslie has an incredibly busy travel schedule for September, so Julie and Leslie will be in direct contact about that, and we'll find out. So we talked about actually doing some open houses, but the open houses will happen, I think. My original notes said October, November. And so that will happen after all of the workshops have happened and that feedback considered. So was that the same as you had on your, I mean, we're looking at sort of October and November, that October would be a time when we would have probably on a Saturday at the library is my hope. And we have a bunch of dates. We don't have to skip, nail any of that down right now. Although we could.
I would
If-
love to get them on my calendar as soon as possible.
Okay, let me, just in terms of, assuming that after this next sort of open house set of, or office hours workshops, and then the select board and planning board workshops, if, assuming that we go directly into open houses at that point, the Saturdays that work for the library, Saturday, October 11th in the afternoon, 12:30 to 4.
November.
Oh, those are November. Yes, those are November. Those are November. October, here's a Saturday in October. I've got so many dates down. Saturday, October 7th. There, the libraries, no, not for Leslie. No, I gotcha. Knock that out. The other dates we have in October are only evenings, and so we could look at October 11th in the evening. That's a Wednesday. No, okay, got it. No, that's helpful.
These were open houses we're talking about. right?
Yeah. Yeah, we have Saturday, the 28th. 10 to 2 of October, sorry, yeah, October 28th, yeah, oh,
Yep.
that's a possibility, excellent. And we may, instead of 10 to 2, we may, I know that there's the soccer team in Topsham has their last match on that day, so we may want to go 12:30 to 4. So, yeah. So whoever's ringing, there we go. Thank you for pointing that out. So if that's our date, that's good. We got a date.
Then we're gonna propose the 12:30 to 4.
Yeah, we're gonna propose 12:30 to 4 on Saturday, October 28th. Kirk, what do you think? All right. Oh, my Lord.
Too easy.
Very good.
Will we miss the fall color?
Depends on the season.
Yeah.
I'm not the season, what the season.
I would say by the 28th it'll be gone.
Oh,
You never know. It's been so wet, the colors
Yeah.
may hang around.
I won't be.
Thank you for that. That was a lot easier than I thought it would be. So that will be at the library, and just to let folks know, we're gonna do a session at Highland Green. And that, you know, I'm not sure, we'll talk to Leslie about whether or not she's virtually present, but October 24th, 10 to 12. And if you're not available, we're gonna wing it.
I think I am.
I'll put a
I'm
question.
holding it, but I don't think it's a real date.
Okay, so that's question mark. That's great. Okay, that was, we've got us through quite a few things there. The only real question is having a method for handling questions that come in. We're pretty organized around folks who are really looking at the code with a fine tooth comb. We'll come to office hours, we'll have those conversations, but folks who may just have questions or send them in, you know, I don't know if staff has the time to, I thought that there was an actual sort of question, but it's not an app, but some software possibility on the website, town website, to sort of ask a question. There was that opportunity with the update process, because we probably had 200 questions, and the committee met and went over every one of them in the process of updating that comp plan. So let's see if there's some kind of, yeah. Okay, now we're gonna do boring stuff like approve minutes.
Susan,
I have a hand from Kurt.
just a,
Yeah,
first of all, I hope I wasn't overly offensive by saying is it's been play tested, because obviously it have been, not by me, so I'm confused by it.
not by me, but well done by Leslie
Sure, so what I
and
would
others.
ask is, being a visual person, are there any communities that I could go Google Earthing to, or something like that, that would really help me understand the end product?
Yeah,
And I don't know if Leslie, could email a couple, I don't want to put you on the spot, or maybe, you know, a couple off your heads and say, yeah, go check this place out. Other than Bath and Lockwood, because I got those.
yeah.
I mean, there are lots of communities that have buildings built up to the sidewalk, which I'm sure you're familiar with. This code is pretty unique to Topsham in terms of the building design parameters, in terms of building widths and such, but I can send you a couple of communities that I know of that, and I'll just forward those to Julie.
Sure. That'd be great.
That'd be
Forward them
helpful.
to
Thank you.
Julie, and then, you know, we can post them on the website, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, because there is a recode page on the website. Okay,
I assume that would be useful to your.
Completely.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. Yes, thank you for doing that.
so if you have a half dozen of those, Leslie, send them along.
No, yeah, I don't, but and I haven't done an extensive search to see where all of these kinds of things are going on. I was thinking more of the kind of more cottage scale buildings.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, truthfully, Main Street is a good example of that kind of, and that's what we really modeled a good bit of the code on, was that the new construction on Maine. So I feel like, you know, I'm just going to give you a couple other communities that have that kind of scale. But you can look at pretty much any Main Street in the country to find buildings, you know, built up to the sidewalk and such.
Traditional New England towns often have exactly that. And I know Auburn is using quite a lot of form-based code in its downtown area. So that's bigger than we are, but not far away.
Yarborough, is that how you say it?
Auburn,
No,
yeah, not
Yarborough.
Yarmouth.
Yarmouth.
Yeah, Yarmouth has a strip along Route 1, I think, right, that is using some form-based code. And then, yeah. Auburn.
But again, I look at Yarmouth and Topsham is not really, or Falmouth and Topsham, that's not really a downtown. 20 years from now, I'm hoping though, if someone says, I'll meet you in Topsham, we'll know where. You won't have to ask where, you mean on Lower Village or Upper Village, or the mall, everybody will know where downtown is.
And hopefully there'll be more options here, where to grab a bite or some coffee, and we won't have to go elsewhere to do that. Yeah. So, okay, shifting now just for a second, going back up the agenda to, the frequently asked questions. I just want to check with Margaret. Margaret and I both got some very, good suggestions from Sky, who read through the frequently asked questions. I sort of came to Julie with the question of like, I can't take this any further. Margaret's done what she can. The committee has done what it can. Where can we go with this? And I'm wondering if the suggestions were something that you could flesh out at all, Margaret, and if you can't, I'm wondering if we can actually take some of that to Leslie at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna suggest that because some of the advice or comments that Sky provided weren't answering the questions, they were providing feedback on the answer, sort of guiding like the type of response that would be appropriate. But I don't think that we have necessarily the expertise in order to answer some of them. So what I'm doing is just kind of integrating those comments, and I'm gonna maybe highlight them in some way that would be helpful. And then if we are able to send them to Leslie, that would be phenomenal.
I like those nods all around. Great. Good next steps. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So the only other thing we need to do is approve the minutes of our July 10th meeting. And it does, I don't care if you were there or not. It's perfectly legal for all of us who are present today to approve those minutes.
I'm gonna read them and I'll make a motion, we accept them as presented.
Okay,
I will second.
a second. All in favor of approving those minutes, raise your hand. Look at all those hands. Beautiful, thank you. Unanimous. And with that, is there anything further? Oh, we can do the check-in. Check-in.
3 minutes.
Yeah, we got 5 minutes left. No, 3 minutes. You're right. That clock is wrong. I just wanted to hear from Pete whether or not, because I let the select board know that we have the good fortune of most meetings having a member of the planning board join us at our meetings and having a member of CPIC join the planning board meetings. And I know there have been some things, the workshops have been going on. Is there anything you would like to share with us in terms of that process and those discussions?
Well, I just want to thank Julie. She's been very productive in presenting information to the planning board, and the discussion has been robust. So I was very happy to see that happening based upon the two that we had, July 27th and August 10th. There were, regarding the topics, conditional use permits, spent a lot of time on those on both those days, where Julie had recommended revisions to the principal use table, which is 6-1 rather, regarding conditional uses and making them either permitted or prohibited in certain zones. Other towns' conditional use permits were cited, including Brunswick, Portland, Lisbon, and Lewiston. The expiration date was discussed. It should be a 12-month. It was suggested that we have a 12-month expiration date, the same as site plans, to kind of keep that consistent. And then the planning board and Julie proposed changes to the open space provisions. Following the Conservation Commission's recommendation of using a per bedroom fee in lieu of the current per unit calculation. And 3 examples were given with numbers. And I asked Julie a question about, what do most developers do? Do they try to provide the open space, or do they pay the fee? And Julie indicated that most of the developers choose to create the open spaces rather than pay the fee in lieu of the open spaces, even though I guess the ones that I've attended for the last couple of months have been ones that, so I got just the opposite impression. But, and then the fees collected, according to what I was told by Julie, are used exclusively for open space conservation. And the person who works with that is Victor Langelo, the chair of the Topsham Conservation Commission. He can provide more details regarding fee calculations. So that's kind of highlighting.
Great.
Would it be fair to say that the fee was applied for smaller lots when there were larger lots where they had a lot of room to donate land? They used that process, and maybe, I'm thinking the 4-acre lot that didn't have a lot of room is probably the one that paid the fee in lieu. Park Street, for example, I think it's one right. That would probably be my assessment, that the smaller ones would use the fee, but the bigger ones, usually you've got land you can't access, or it's wetland or something, right. You have all
Something they can't build on.
and they can't build on anyway, right?
I was hoping that, but the Eagle Lake subdivision was one that they chose to pay which kind of surprised me, because the average size of the lots there were about an acre, and they were like 40 some odd, lots plus roads and et cetera. So
Yeah, if they'd only dropped it to 3 acres, it'd be still generated a lot of open space.
But I guess my point, I had brought it up to Julie before the meeting, before these meetings in the open space, going back to the comprehensive plan and the emphasis on the open spaces there, for the public, and the discussions that we had today. There are other towns like I believe Falmouth who incentivize rather than put a fee, they like a bonus, like
I talked about that, yeah.
so
I think we ought to pursue.
I don't.
Well, it's not.
There's other communities that do have that bonus. That if you can,
But I haven't discussed it with Leslie or anybody else, but it's good, because the planning board, they're the people who implement.
Yeah.
We're talking about here, it's important that they are spending the time, and they even, the chair recommended maybe, setting aside more dedicated time to
Great.
discuss.
It sounds like that's gonna apply outside the area of Topsham Center code.
Yes,
Yeah, much more.
yes, because they're not just, yes,
Yeah,
they're doing it
it's
all.
unlikely, even with the new space that may be available.
So it's been very helpful to me to attend the planning board, even though I don't say too much, I'm taking a lot in, but,
Great,
it's helpful to me.
that's helpful, thank you. And I think that's probably all at the moment, because I've sort of provided the update what happened at the select board, got the workshop out of that, got some concerns, we're looking forward to hearing those. And with that,
What's tomorrow?
tomorrow we're having a workshop to sort of take this the next step, and it won't be recorded, and it's an informal session for
to
us.
talk about what we've done
Yes.
so far.
Yes, and there are some things that I would like to raise with you. And we may not even have a full hour, but let's go ahead and meet.
Are we meeting upstairs?
I would like to meet in the conference room, yeah, because the interns have finished their work.
They have gone.
They did a great job, the interns are gone. Okay, thanks, folks. See you later. Signing off.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.
So that report that they